Wonderful. Let us pray. Dear God, we give you thanks for all the effort, all the work that has gone into this master project so far. And we ask you to bless the work that still remains to get done. We give you thanks for these architects who have done so much for us, and also our committee that has worked tirelessly to listen to all voices and to put into a design some of the desires by the ministry teams. We ask you to continue to bless us as we go forward and as we identify perhaps a future project to engage in. We know that we are midway between now and then, and we give you thanks for the work accomplished so far. Bless this meeting, that all of our questions may be answered, and those who are not, that we may be able to answer them a little bit later on this week. Bless the speakers and all of our audience, both at home and here in place. We ask you this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, I have a very small role in this whole entire project, so I am going to invite to the microphone the one that actually has the most to do with this project, and that is our own Dick Demon. So Dick, why don't you introduce the project and our guests for today?
Thanks, Roman. And thank you all for attending this town hall meeting, the folks here and the folks at home that are participating online. We're going to present to you in a couple of minutes a conceptual master plan for our 10-acre site and discuss the steps that we've taken thus far to get to this point. At the conclusion of this presentation, we'll invite your questions, your comments concerning the master plan, and if there are still questions at the 1:30 mark, we'll stop the meeting and you can submit those to us, and as Roman has explained, we'll answer those online in our website later. Before we begin, I'd like to thank those that have had a particular hand in the development of the master plan thus far. I'd like to thank the good Lord for his many blessings. I'd like to thank Father Roman for his leadership and support throughout. I'd like to thank the Vestry for their steadfast support of this project, and particularly the 2022 Vestry for setting up a charter for our committee, our facilities planning committee. And then the 2023 Vestry for funding the outstanding architectural firm of Merriman Holt Powell to work with us. I'd like to thank the 9 members of the facilities planning committee who are all listed on the last page of this presentation that will be online for you to review. To thank them for their dedicated work, their expertise, and their compassion for this church. There's still work to be done, so this is not a farewell. I'd like to thank the many lay leaders and stakeholders in our parish who provided information and insights for the master plan project. And lastly, I'd like to thank Merriman Holt Powell Architects for their expertise and experience in working with churches and working with our church. Their professionalism is outstanding, and it's been a joy working with them, and particularly the 3 members of Merriman Holt Powell who are with us today to make this presentation. Jim Powell, the president of Merriman Holt Powell, Colin Gatlin, the project manager for our project, and Charles Williams, who's the lead architect for our project. As I say, it's been a pleasure working with you. And Jim, you're on.
Thank you, Dick, so much for your kind words. Thank you, Father, and thank you all for having us today. We're very excited to be here to talk with you about your important project, and we're very excited for you as you continue on your journey to create a master plan to help guide the change and growth of your facilities into the future to address your ongoing ministry needs. Just talk briefly about the format of our presentation. We have 35 slides, not too many, and I'm going to lead off, talk for a little bit, and then I'm going to pass the mic to Colin. He's going to talk for a bit. He will hand it to Charles, and then he will hand it back to me to close us out. So we're looking forward to our time together, leading up until about 1:30. We're happy to stay for as long as you would like, however, and we certainly look forward to hearing your comments and answering any questions. We know you have questions, answering any questions that you have about the work that you're about to see and about the process that we have engaged with you all in. As Father and Dick mentioned, we are not close to done. We started in May. We should be finished at the very end of the year, but the truth is we're not done until you tell us that we are done. So everything that you are going to see is a work in progress. We feel great about the work that has been done so far. From our perspective, this process has been working, flowing, just like it should, so we hope you take some comfort in that. So I'm going to move on into the presentation. So there we are. There's our intrepid group of 16. We have a group of wonderful, dedicated professionals with different skill sets. We know how to work as a team, leveraging the particular gifts that God has given us through each individual in our firm. So the three of us, Charles, Colin, and I, have been your core team so far, but you will see other members of our firm. We will bring them in to tap their expertise as the process moves along in the future. These are some of the strengths that we think we bring to you as a liturgical architect. We have been designing ecclesiastical architecture for 30 years. We celebrated our 30th anniversary July 1. God willing, we will be doing the work that we love to do for another 30 years. We do not see the work that we do as a job. We think it as being far more important than that. We see ourselves as proselytizing through the architecture that we collaborate with our clients to create. We see ourselves as experts with additions, renovations, and restorations of historic congregations and buildings such as yours. We have a highly collaborative process internally and with our clients that's based on what we call creative listening. And what does that mean? That means the creativity stems from understanding the client thoroughly first. We're active, the leaders of our firm are actively involved in every phase of our work. We have a strategic size for our firm, 16 people. We've always been about that size, have no plans to be a drastically different size. That size allows the leaders of our firm to be directly involved doing this, meeting with wonderful folks such as yourselves. We are very passionate and committed to make your project a great success, and I think it will be. We started by creating goals. We always start master planning by creating goals with our clients. We met with leadership, we met with the committee, we had a strengths and opportunities session listening to everything that's great about St. Dunstan's and what are the opportunities for your future. We distilled everything that we heard into 10 very high-level goals to guide us through this process. We typically like, for the first goal, to be the mission statement of the church, and that is what we did with you all, to suggest that all subsequent goals are in support of the mission statement of the church. I don't typically like to read language in a presentation like this, but goals are so important, I am going to do exactly that, so please forgive me. Number one, provide a master plan that facilitates St. Dunstan's mission to unite all people with the love of God. What a beautiful statement that is. Number two, develop exciting new architecture and refresh existing facilities to promote our Christian mission, enable community fellowship, support outreach, and attract new members to the parish. Three, provide excellent and exciting spaces for children and youth ministries that will attract young families. Number 4, improve the visibility of the campus from Stubner Airline and make the campus entrances more visible and inviting. We've talked a lot about this one, and you're going to see some designs that address number 4. Number 5, develop the west 4-acre parcel, the back 40, we call it from time to time, with flexible facilities that engage the parish and broader community. We have some exciting ideas about that, I think. Number 6, provide larger, brighter parish hall facilities with a commercial kitchen and larger restrooms and other support spaces that will comfortably accommodate the whole parish and future community events. That's a great one. 7, renovate the Dave interiors by providing larger and more functional areas for music, sacristy and altar guild, clergy vesting, and the church entrance/foyer. 8, expand and consolidate the church offices in an environment that promotes collaboration and pastoral care. Number 9, improve the safety and security of the campus while maintaining gracious invitation to newcomers and members alike. And the last one, provide maintenance-friendly materials, energy-efficient systems, and new and future technology for new and renovated buildings. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Colin to talk about the next few slides.
Thank you, Jim. As Jim mentioned, my name's Colin, and I'm the project manager for the project, but as he said, we all wear many hats within our office. And so what I'm going to talk about now is some of the steps that we've already completed to date. There's been lots of discussions, harking back to our creative listening, and so that's what we'll talk about here. So to date, we've talked about the vision casting, which identified those strengths and opportunities, which allowed us to create the goals that Jim just went over. That then followed up with ministry interviews with many stakeholders within St. Dunstan's. We'll see that list here in just a moment, but I want to continue talking about the site analysis that we did, as well as the benchmark tours. All of those things helped us in creating this master plan, but before we did that, we had to see how much square footage y'all currently had on your campus, and so we created the existing space program just to see what we were working with, and then through that we created the master plan, which we'll look at here shortly. As part of this process, as Dick mentioned, it's a conceptual master plan, but we will continue to further develop it into a 3D model, which will really show the character of the designs that we're coming up with. These are just some of the many ministry stakeholders we interviewed with, starting with hospitality, community, and outreach. We then talked about infrastructure, the staff offices, safety, non-AV tech, and then we circled into worship and everything that revolves around your services, as well as the music and live stream portion of that. And then we followed up at the end with ministry of children and youth and adults and how that all gets handled on the campus. And so there was many, many great things that came out of those discussions, and we have lots of notes that we're happy to share with you if you want to see some of the questions and activity that went on in those, but it was very fruitful. Then we came to the site. We had been here multiple times, but we spent a solid day here reviewing everything outside, inside your current mechanical systems, and basically everything that has to do with the campus. And so we got real familiar with it, which is a big step in creating a master plan for a campus of your size. You guys are fortunate to have plenty of land that we can work with. A lot of our clients are restricted with sites, and so that's one of the great things we like about this one, especially that back 40 that you guys have. These are just some of the diagrams that we created in doing our analysis. We have many more of these, but these help drive what the master plan design ultimately comes to. As I mentioned, we went on a benchmark tour with some folks from the community here, and what the benchmark tours are for is really just to see what works for facilities versus what doesn't work. It's not to copy, but just to get an idea to get the juices flowing on what you guys want to have on your campus. And so these are 5 of the places that we went to. They all had various things that we heard you guys wanted to address within the master plan. And so it was very fruitful. Then we created a long, we're not going to go through this, but there's probably 4 or 5 pages of this program just showing your existing space, what we're proposing for the new. But the big numbers here I want to show is your existing is at about 30,000 square foot, and we're looking at adding an additional 41,000 conditioned space as well as site improvements on the back 40. So there's big exciting things ahead, and I think that you guys are going to be very excited to see what we've come up with. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Charles, where he'll talk about the gaming and then the actual design that we came up with.
Thank you, Colin. So, my name is Charles Williams. I'm a project architect with Merriman Holt Powell. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the working master plan. Just before we get into that, just a brief note about how we got to the master plan as it stands today. We started by cutting out the shapes of the space program, kind of going bit by bit, looking at the individual pieces, and creating a patchwork of the different areas based on missionary needs, based on different categories that we saw. And we took those and then, with the committee, started to lay out the beginnings of a master plan. Just a brief note about the different categories. We divided up into things like children's, adults, worship, support space, missionary activities, and all the way down to detention. So stormwater, which we know is a big component of any project these days. So just setting a baseline, this is, of course, your current campus. It's a lovely campus with a lot of trees, a lot of space to grow and improve. Just as a note, so in the middle there, in kind of a light shade of purple, is the nave, where we currently are. We then have in green and pink the parish hall, and then in kind of a light blue at the BEC. For all of the slides you're about to see, it's directed so that Stubner Airline is to your right, so just keep that in mind. And then the back 40 is to your left, with Cashel Glen to your north. So, without further ado, this is what we and the committee, as well as the ministers and several of the lay people of the church, have been working on. So, based on everything we heard, this is the general idea of the master plan. The idea is to turn the back 40 into more of a park-like atmosphere, with the idea that it's a space for both the church to use and for the church to outreach into the broader community. We then have a larger multi-purpose building to the north with the idea of supporting a lot of the missionary work as well as a lot of the gathering needs. We also have a reorientation of the campus towards Stubner Airline. This is something we heard in a lot of the minister interviews, as well as within the committee. There was a desire for a lot of presence on Stubner Airline, more so than what there is now. This also includes a renovation and addition to the nave with an expansion of the narthex to create a better gathering area out front. And then we also have the renovation and reorientation of both the BEC and Parish Hall. These are well-loved buildings, but they could use space improvements. However, we don't see a need to expand the footprint of these individual buildings. And we'll get into that a little later. Before we go on, one of the things to note that we looked at towards the end of the master plan design process so far was the idea of how to allow for more mission outreach. There was a period of time where we were considering looking at the Houston Food Bank coming here. That was on behalf of Father Roman and a few of the ministers reaching out to them and exploring that. One of the issues that they identified that we incorporated into this was the need for larger trucks, such as 18-wheelers, to enter and exit the site. that's necessary for them to use the church as a missionary point. So we're showing a new access point from Stubner Airline directly at the traffic light out there, thank you. And then circling around with a drop-off point at the multipurpose building on the north side, and then circling back out. Getting into it in a little more detail, we started talking with the committee about dividing out the master plan. These are, like the master plan, not complete and still up for plenty of review, up for plenty of discussion. So these are just kind of first big stabs at what could be different projects within the master plan. It's important to note that master plans, as we see them, tend to take anywhere from 20 to 30 years. So there's a lot of dividing out and a lot of planning for the future. The first project is the back 40. The next project is the idea of a multi-purpose building. Along with this is the front parking. Then there's also a nave addition and renovation. And then we have renovations to both the BEC and Parish Hall. Getting into a bit more detail, we'll start with the back 40. And in general, the idea with this is the idea of, again, reaching out to the community by providing park-type facilities as well as space for things like sports programs to come and utilize the space. So the committee and us set about laying out about 5 sports fields. These aren't really programmed sports fields. These are more just general areas where the grass is flattened and it's improved to the point that you can use them for different sports activities. And then we have in the top right a pavilion. This is an open, you can think of this as an open air pavilion, similar to what you can see in a lot of the parks around here, where it's open, it's got concrete to sit on, and it's got shade to get away from the sun and rain as you need it. But other than that, it's pretty simple. It does, however, have space for storage and space for restrooms. That was one of the big needs that we heard in a lot of the discussion, was that there's already been a lot of exploration within the church into providing space for intramurals and such. Y'all have provided that in the past, but one of the big issues is support facilities for them. So we're hoping to provide that here. You also see in kind of a squiggly pattern around the outside the idea of a walking trail. This is to formalize something that already happens, which is that members of the community surrounding St. Dunstan's come and walk dogs, come and use the field as an area to walk and relax. And so this provides space for that, as well as a connection between that community and St. Dunstan's. And throughout each of these projects, we identified how they connect back to the goals that Jim reviewed at the start. And so the main goal here was develop the back 40 to provide more facilities that are flexible to reach out to the community, as well as for St. Dunstan's use. The next project, and this is the, thank you, the largest of the projects, at least in terms of new footprint, and we're calling it the multi-purpose building. I know that sounds a little not well defined, but that's kind of the purpose of it, is that this is a flexible space to provide for a lot of different activities that y'all have identified needing space for. So within this, the idea is that there is a large double height space that can serve as both a gym, a parish hall, and a worship space. It has a stage in one corner, or one side, where there's room for growth. One of the things we heard is that with the new 901 service, which just recently became the 901 service, there's interest in seeing where they could go as they tend to grow. And so this would be their future location as they continue to grow. Along the outer perimeter is several storage spaces for different missionary ministries, so outreach. And the idea is that they can use the loading dock, which is at the very north end of the multipurpose building, as well as the multipurpose gym space in the middle to support their missions as they need. And then we have in the right a glass-filled lobby and a new drop-off. The idea being that since this is planned to be both a gathering and worship space, that it needs a drop-off to be able to be functional. This also kind of signifies a area of entry for the church that faces student or airline. In the bottom, you can see in blue the start of some of the additional children's ministries and moves. This would be where the youth's new home would be. And then we also have some of the nursery. The idea with this was that when programming the space and when talking about the scheduling of the nursery and childcare, it was found that there was a need to move them closer to the nave, which is just to the south of this plan. Oh, sorry, I went up instead of down. And so this really hits three high-level goals that we wanted to point out: creating new and fresh architecture that also supports the Christian mission of St. Dunstan's and attracts outreach for the community. It also doubles as a parish hall, as I mentioned already. And so the idea would be that this space is light-filled, having lots of glass at the second level, and really becoming a new beacon and point to arrive at on campus. And it can also double as play space for the children and youth and their ministries. Now, this part of the project could be part of both the nave expansion and addition or part of the multipurpose building. And this is the idea of reorienting the campus towards student or airline. Presently, the campus is oriented inward with a focus on community and gathering. And we want to maintain that, and we do think that we're maintaining that, but there is also concern about outreach and being visible from student or airline. One of the things we heard from the ministers and from the committee was that the current campus is not really visible from the street that most people approach it. You can see in these photos, and you can see by just driving down student or airline, that the buildings are kind of pushed back into the trees, hidden by the brush, hidden by the trees. It makes for a lovely campus in terms of once you're on it and experiencing those trees and the shade they provide. But when you're trying to find it for the first time, it can be a challenge. So we want to address that by providing a new entry directly off student or airline, as well as some additional parking spaces and two drop-offs, one with a roundabout for both the nave and the multipurpose building. You can also see with that little kind of orthogonal C in the bottom right that we want to move the bells closer to the road so that they're more visible and more kind of seen within from the street. And so we provide about 64 spaces. You all already have a lot of parking. We find that it's plenty for the current and planned future growth, but there's also a need for visible parking from the street, and so that's what this addresses. We also want to ensure that it's still accessible for 18-wheelers, as I mentioned earlier. Next, we have the addition and renovation of the nave. The idea with this is that the nave itself, we heard, was pretty well functional in its current format, but the supporting spaces, the sacristies, the vestry, the choir loft, all could use some extra space. They're essentially a little undersized for what they're currently used for. And so when we began to look at that, There was also a need identified for an expanded narthex. Right now, the narthex is within the perimeter of the nave, as you can see behind you. And while it provides a separation, at least in planning, it's not really separated visually or acoustically. And so it makes it a difficult place to wait, to come in and enter and gather. So we're showing an expanded narthex with the idea that this is a double-height glass-filled space to allow for daylight to come through the narthex and still shine on the beautiful stained glass within the nave, and act as a welcoming front to St. Dunstan's. The idea is that people will see glass, they'll see something, architecture that is reminiscent of what you currently have, but maybe a bit more modern, a bit more light, with a new drop-off out front that clearly says, this is where you enter. You also have the expanded sacristy, the vestries, as well as some additional supporting space around it that allow for additional square footage within this nave. In addition to renovating the nave, as I mentioned earlier, there was a need identified to move the nursery close by. With that, an interesting idea came up that we're excited about, which is the idea of putting indoor play space adjacent to the narthex. The idea being that since the narthex is acoustically separate from the nave, there will be opportunities for it to be more of a living room, more of a gathering space. And alongside that, there's space for children to play visible and where they can be monitored right close by. And finally, we have the parish hall and BEC. As I mentioned earlier, these spaces, as they are, allow for plenty of square footage already, but do need some changes to their planning based on what the space program showed us and based on what ministers and committee members gave us feedback in the interviews. So we have kind of a modification where the children stay approximately where they are now, but they get expanded and then kind of condensed to one side of the BEC, where they can be in a secure area, where it can be locked off and ensured that only parents and those that need to get into that space can go into it. We do also have, alongside that, a change to the playgrounds. The playgrounds, we heard, was one of the many things that had kind of been left as it was. And so there was a desire to put the playgrounds inside the courtyard to make them visible from anywhere in the church and kind of rebuild them so that they have a lot of shade, new playground facilities, and the like, so that way the children can enjoy them. We then have in pink at the bottom a relocation of the admin area. One of the things we heard was that the admin could stand to add some additional offices as well as be reformatted to be a bit more collaborative. So we're doing that down there in the pink. And then the parish hall really becomes an area for both music and adults, with the idea that formation takes over where the admin was, and that space obviously gets renovated and cleaned up. And then the music area expands out from where it is currently, with the idea that the parish hall, the existing one that y'all have now, could really serve as a multifunction space for both choir and large adult gatherings that maybe don't need all 300 people, but maybe just need at max 90 to 80. And so again, the goal is to consolidate the office as well as the goals to support children and youth. And so this screen in no particular order shows how all of those different little bits and pieces add up to the total square footage, both addition and renovation, and how, at least right now, the committee and we are thinking about dividing the space. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, let's talk about the schedule and next steps. And then that will be the end of our presentation, and we look forward to your comments and questions. So we started in May 17th to be exact, and the schedule shows us completing the master plan at the end of the year, at the end of December, but as I said at the outset, we're not done until you say that we are. So if it extends for whatever reason past that point, that is okay from our perspective. It doesn't change our services. Above the white horizontal line are all the steps that we have completed so far, and everything in gold describes upcoming steps. So I think we mentioned earlier that we'll continue to refine the master plan and the phasing for it based on all the feedback from all of you. And then once the plan is set, we'll bring it into 3 dimensions and develop a model for all of your facilities, both current and additions. And that'll be really exciting to describe in 3 dimensions the future of the parish. Eventually, we will decide what the Phase 1 project wants to be that addresses your highest needs. And we will need to get a cost estimate, a ballpark estimate, not a bid that's way in the future, but a ballpark estimate for what the Phase 1 project will cost, so we know what we're up against financially. We do not know yet what the Phase 1 project will be or the order of the phases, as we mentioned earlier. And we'll circle back with you at the end of this process to show you the final master plan, the 3D model, the Phase 1 project, all the phases, and cost information for Phase 1. So that'll be exciting, and we hope everyone can attend that final town hall. That'll be fun and important. So thanks for your time today. If you have any further questions after the conclusion of our time together, please feel free to reach out to Dick, email him, or ask him when you see him any remaining questions that you might have. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what's the time and how many minutes do you have for questions?
We've got about 20 minutes. And I've had a question from a parishioner just a few days ago that I'd like to address as the first question. Thanks. So to get us started with questions, I was asked, sorry. Third time's a charm here. I was asked recently by a friend and parishioner the following question. So why are we doing this master plan work? And why are you doing it now? And I responded, good question. After some thought, I think the master plan project had its origins in the work that the parish did in 2018 and 2019 to get ready to call Father Roman in early 2020. The work that was done then was required by the diocese and included, if you may recall, the Holy Cow survey of our congregants and a discernment period to prepare the mission statement, core values, and mission strategy, which are still included in our service bulletin every Sunday for the services. Unfortunately, when Father Roman arrived in St. Dunstan's in early 2020 to begin his ministry, the COVID lockdown also arrived. And the work to implement our mission strategies was deferred somewhat. When we emerged from the pandemic in 2021 and 22, there was a recognition that in order to have St. Dunstan's implement our mission strategies, we needed to change things as a church to grow. We believe that those churches that are not looking to change and are comfortable with the status quo are destined for declining membership and the inability to fulfill their missionary work. So as St. Dunstan's began to ramp up church and community activities in 21 and 22, there were a number of parishioners who observed that if we just had a larger parish hall and a commercial kitchen, we could accommodate more activities and fulfill mission strategies and therefore grow as a church. Fortunately, the vestry and Father Roman took that idea and determined it was time to look at the long-term needs of our church. It's been almost 3 decades since we've built a building on this site, and we should have a master plan for the site that looks out to identify the development of our site over the next several decades and accommodate growth that is needed in our parish. And that master plan will, of course, include a commercial kitchen. So, questions?
I couldn't tell from the slide where the commercial kitchen was going to be. Can somebody show me, just because I like to cook?
I'm so glad you asked that, because as Dick was talking, I realized I hadn't pointed that out, because that is a very important part of all this. So the commercial kitchen is within the multi-purpose building, and if you look, yeah, thank you very much. Let me see. So the commercial kitchen is directly above the stage. So the stage is center right, center left. So the stage is center left. It's a pointer, unfortunately, is there. So the kitchen is directly above the stage, right there. And the reason why is because, why we're putting it in the new building, is because really in the current form and current shape of both the previous kitchen that was back behind the nave, as well as the small kitchen within the parish hall, there wasn't really space to make a new 2-code commercial kitchen. And there was also concern that in its current form, or in any of those locations, it wouldn't be able to serve the parish hall, which was its main function. And so this is directly off of it. It could have a serving line, it could have a serving window. We don't know quite yet which way it needs to go. But that's the idea.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
With the changes being made to expand facilities in here, what about the columbarium?
So right now,
What about the columbarium?
yeah, thank you. So right now, the columbarium stays where it currently is. There's no plans to renovate, to change and modify that. Y'all did a great job in improving and updating that space already. And right now, and with all the interviews we had, no one really said anything negative about the columbarium, any need to change it. So it's staying where it is.
Hi, first of all, thank you to the committee. Obviously, this has taken a tremendous amount of time and effort and work, so thank you. Just 3 questions. They don't need to be answered now necessarily. One is the air conditioning currently in the nave. It's very cold out here, but hot up in the altar. Is there a solution that could be found? Secondly, I personally would love to see some pew cushions. They don't have to be fancy, no needlepoint, plain Jane. And if not for the entire nave, at least maybe just a portion would be a lot more comfortable than the hard wooden pew. And the last question is the handicap parking locations in the new section. I'm sure that's to be considered. Right now, a lot of people in the handicap are actually parking in the visitors parking because it's a little closer. So those are my questions.
Thank you. I'm so glad you gave me the chance to not answer them right now, because one of those, the mechanical system specifically.
But you know, with the cushions, we can have a fundraiser that if you donate 100,000 or more, we'll give you your own cushion.
There you go.
Any other questions?
Well, let me answer a couple of those real quick, Father Roman. So the mechanical system, we just won't know until we start opening it up, but I'm sure there's something we can do. Part of the project is to renovate the nave to some degree. The accessible parking spaces, at least for the new parking lot right now, would be planned close to the front doors. The reason why is Texas Accessibility Code does require that we provide a approved and very gracious way for people who need that to enter the building.
This is more of a request for the architects and for Dick and the team, but at work sometimes we benchmark, and I would love to see an ASA versus square footage for similar churches. I know it's not the same and is a function of mission, but that would be really interesting to compare these plans in the future versus sort of what's worked for others.
That's a great question. What started this whole process was the fact that if you were to put all the three services at the time together, 7:45, 9, and 11, at the time we were not even thinking about 901. If you were to put all the services together for a potluck and everybody came, you would have no space to put them at, because our capacity in the current Price Fellowship Hall is no more than 90 to 100. So I think you're right. I think purpose and mission determines space, but to have a study of what do churches of this average Sunday attendance have in terms of space, that would be good.
Easy to do. We have a lot of data to share with you.
Any other questions? Yes, right.
Yeah, one of the questions I had is about the back 40. And one of the issues we've had in the past is there wasn't a fence that was closing it in, so you just don't want kids going all over there and back to where there's no fencing, back to other subdivision in areas. Is there plans on having a fence in that area, in the back?
Yes, so we're planning on a wrought iron fence between the driveway that you guys currently have and the back 40, as well as addressing the openings that are within the fence that the neighborhood has put in. We'd like to secure all that because, yeah, there's a liability of people coming onto the campus freely. So we definitely will have a fence that looks great.
Anybody else? There was one and one. Chuck and then Laura.
Yes. Any master plan that I've ever been associated with, I've worked at the Department of Aviation, the airport, is based on projections, statistical information. So what statistical information did you base all this development on projections for the growth of this parish, logical and potential? I'm quite surprised because every square foot is going to be costing money, which we're going to have to foot the bill for. So to me, that's number one that should have been addressed. And I'm interested in knowing just what were you thinking?
Thank you for that. Is an excellent question. And I don't know if we mentioned already, we probably have, but the presentation will be available after this meeting for anyone that wants to review it. I'm sorry?
So what is the development? What is the demographics? We know that over the last 10 years, we've had, I think it's 10,000 family units within a certain family radius. And we did that study. Actually, you all did it with the Holy Cow. I read these numbers in your report. At the time, it was something like 6,000 units had been built around this area. And since then, I mean, you've seen the development in the last 4 years. That's one. Two, we're beginning to see more foot traffic in our congregation, in our church. We've had a lot more visitors. Third, we do believe that 901 will continue to grow just because this area is becoming fastly second-generation Hispanic, Latino. That area will grow. We already have an average Sunday attendance of 30 to 34, which is not bad because we just started less than a year ago, and we have over 100 people who have who have been visitors and filled out guest cards for that service. 10 baptisms in the last 2 months. I mean, that gives you an idea. So we do believe that the population density calls for some additional space. As to how much of that density will we, St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church, will have access to, or how many of them will become Episcopalians? I mean, we just don't know. But at least there is a potential that many of them will come and visit. But again, if you all can put the data from the Census Bureau and all the folks, I mean, that would be great.
Sure, and just to piggyback on what Father Roman just said, so we, as Colin described earlier, we had a number of ministry interviews, interviewing ministry representatives to talk about their current and future needs. We began the interview process utilizing a questionnaire, which we often use. It had 9 or 10 questions on it that we distributed ahead of the interviews to get people thinking, right, about what their needs were going to be. We asked everyone that we interviewed to think about, no one has a crystal ball. No one knows what the numbers will be in 30 years. It's just too far out into the future. But we can look out into the not too distant future, 5 or 7 years, maybe 10 years, and have an idea of where we're going. Is it a guarantee? No. But we can use the data based on the trend of the parish as a whole up to this point in time with other evidence of the surrounding area to suggest where it will go 5, 7, 10 years from now. So we base the space program, the space needs, on the numbers that we heard you all anticipate having 5, 7, 10 years out. I hope that answers your question.
And also remember that this is a 30-year project. We do something phase 1 for the next few years, and then we'll do a phase 2 later on, then we'll do a phase 3 later on. We're not adding 41,000 square feet of new space in 2 years or in a year unless we win the Powerball.
Excuse me, let me just add that this is not a straight line projection of people sitting in the pews. We're seeing changes to the way we worship with online worship. We're having many more people worship at our church online. We're seeing other changes here where we're going to provide children's ministries that we haven't provided before. So I think there's a change in just a straight line adding people and doing just exactly what we've done in the past. Well, we've got sports fields. We've got organized sports that we want to bring in younger children to participate. For instance, we've been in touch with I-9 Sports that has a very nice principles and a package that are very, very compatible with our church. And if they have 7-year-olds playing games here, I think we're going to have an exposure for bringing those young families into the church. And I think from what you saw with the other spaces, they're just some quality spaces that are for children.
Good. We have Laura and then we have Angela, but also remember, right now we have very little in terms of potential for income-producing ventures for a church. And churches in the future will have to create some of their budgets through in-house. We bring a league that occupies our fields. Now you have a source of income. We have a large hall that can compete with the quinceañera and wedding receptions market in the area. Now you have a source of income. You have independent rooms that you can lease to various ventures within town. Now you have another source of income. So right now we have very little source of income producing abilities. With some of these projects, we will be able to finance. Now, let me go to Laura and then to...
You didn't mention, but I'm sure you figured it in. This is an aging population. While we're looking to bring in new and younger families, we need to address those concerns for the handicapped and for those people that need access, that won't have to walk as far in terms of accessing the property. and being dropped off in bad weather, et cetera.
Thank you. Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 new drop-offs planned directly in front of the major gathering and worship venues. So, one outside the nave here and one outside of the planned multi-purpose building. Those directly connect to the inside and connect to an indoor corridor, which can get you from the multi-purpose building all the way to the parish hall, inside. Accessibility standards in general are one of our requirements, and so as far as addressing ramps, as far as addressing kind of making sure the pathways are even and able to be navigated, we're charged to do that by the state to begin with. There's no planned second-story space right now, so that's an additional benefit. Everything is still 1 story. So, good.
Hi, I just have 2 things real quickly. One is that I've had a little bit of feedback as the children's ministry coordinator that some parents would like to have a family restroom on site at some point. I'm sure you've probably looked at that. And then the other is that if we build all of these facilities, do we need to change the storm water retention ponds, or is what we have already adequate?
So, to answer the first one, yes, there's a family restroom planned, at least one. As we go through the planning process and the individual projects, there'll also be consideration for additional ones as needed. That's something we see a lot with churches. As far as stormwater detention, any new building, any additional pavement requires additional storm detention. That's a big factor of what we're going to be exploring in the next few months, is where and how does storm detention get treated. Currently, you'll have a little bit out front, but not the required amount that we see now with Harris County. And so we'll be planning that in the near future, likely a mix of utilizing different green spaces for that. So, yeah, and we do have a civil engineer on contract who will advise us on that and let us know the exact details of that before the master plan is over.
My question is regarding safety and security. What kind of changes are you making for the staff and for the future needs?
That's a very good question. That's something that we hear a lot as one of the high priorities, and that's something the committee has asked us to address in several ways. Some of that is through technology rather than architecture, so more akin to being able to use key card or various kind of locking methods. The admin area is still in one location. It's being moved to the BC area, so it'll likely only have a couple entry points into it. Other things that are more architectural would be vestibules, such as in the narthex, where you can enter, but then you have to go through a secondary set of doors to enter. So that's all stuff we'll want to consider as we start to move into the individual projects. That's more of a detailed concern.
Any other questions? Yes, John. How much is this going to cost?
What is the process of determining which is the first priority to get built?
Well, we'll continue to work with the committee to prioritize the needs. There needs to be a logic to the implementation of the master plan. We certainly need to make sure the parish can continue to operate and operate comfortably and successfully as the phases are executed. One thought that has emerged is that, before this space can be renovated, right, we don't know yet, but there's a likelihood that we may not be able to worship in the nave while it's being renovated. So where would we go? Where would we worship? We need to have a space to do that. Well, one option to make that happen is the multi-purpose gymnasium space. So that may need to come before this renovation happens in the phasing order. But we're going to be putting a lot of thought into that. We'll also be talking a lot about infrastructure. We mentioned stormwater detention, how that will be implemented. We need to talk about a lot more regarding infrastructure.
And let me tell you, purposely, personally, I would love us to tackle a project that is good and ambitious, but affordable, so that we all become so optimistic and so enthusiastic and so filled with potential that then we can tackle more ambitious projects later. And we would look at that as well. So I know some of you are very concerned about going for the whole thing. We're not going to do that. We're going to stage it, and we're going to go with what we can do and afford comfortably, and then we go to something a little bit more ambitious and more ambitious. But the team will decide that, and then we'll present that to the vestry, and the vestry will make those decisions later on. Go ahead.
Very few, if any, churches can afford to build out their master plan in one phase. Almost everyone has to go through a multi-phased effort.
Yeah, multiple phases, absolutely. I just need to build something new that you can name after me, that's all. Any other questions? Any other questions? Actually, that brings one little question. Just Wednesday this last week, somebody asked me, Father, can we have some naming rights? And I don't like the idea of this post was donated by that one, and this one by that one, and that one by somebody else, and then you have 10,000 different names everywhere. But there are substantial enough projects that if you want to create a legacy for someone that means something to you, we could do that. We have a tradition in this church of naming legacy buildings after folks. We can do that as well. So we'll talk about that when the time comes. But yes, there is a potential possibility to do that. Anything else? Any other questions? No. Is Mother Lisa stayed in the building? I know she had to run. No, she's here. Would you bless us? Come, bless us at the end of the meeting. Mother Lisa is as cold as Beth Ann used to be. It is true. It is really cold out here, but up there we're like, Pray.
The Lord be with you. Father God, what an opportunity that you have given St. Dunstan's. We praise you and we thank you for this opportunity. Lord, give us faith that we need to accomplish the works that you have set before us. And I ask all these things in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.